Hey guys, in the last video we talked about dockerignore, and I showed how by using dockerignore we can reduce the build context. And in this particular example we saw that by using dockerignore we could reduce the build context from close to 16 megabytes to close to 550 kilobytes or something, which was like 32 times reduction in terms of size. But what I forgot to mention in that video is how you can also use the information from dockerignore to write more cleaner Docker files. So that is one thing that I would like to cover in this session. And the other thing is, once I created this dockerignore file and I created a pull request, one of my colleagues actually showed me how we can make even more like optimized dockerignore files. And the thing that he told me was that instead of trying to ignore, for example, all this .git, .cache, .idea settings, VS Code directories, and all this .files individually, he said, normally we don't want to pass them to create an image. So instead of trying to like remove all of them one by one, we could actually ignore all of them by just doing a .star. And with this .star command, actually now it ignores all these repositories. So we don't have to specify them individually. So let's just quickly try to add them as comments so that we still know what are the files that we are ignoring. Also ignoring .files, and then we know that these are the .files that we are ignoring, right? So one command to ignore both the .directories and .files, and actually not only it is going to ignore all these other files, but this command will also ignore this dockerignore file also. So also this file, which is dockerignore file, right? So that's one way to optimize it, and the rest of the commands are same. We're ignoring target, we are ignoring all the files and folders that we don't need, so that stays the same. And let's try to run and create a Docker image now. So you know that the command to build an image is docker image build. You tag the image with the name, you give the context, which is current repository, and you give the file name. You don't have to give the file name if the file name is dockerfile, but I like to give it, so that's why I mention it here. As you can see, the context is actually even reduced further. So I think it was somewhere close to, I don't know, 550 KB or 515 KB, but now it's 513 KB, probably by ignoring all this .files. It also ignored some other hidden .files. So one, it reduced the build context. So that's like optimizing this file. And now, if you remember, in this Docker file, I was trying to actually copy the source code and the POM files, like I'm specifying that these are the files that I need, which by the way is a very good approach. So if you're not using dockerignore file, please continue using this approach where you specify what you need rather than trying to copy the whole context. But in this case, since we already have ignored pretty much what we wanted to ignore, instead of trying to ignore source and code, you can actually just say that copy the whole context. And rather than doing this, you can say copy all the files that are not ignored in dockerignore file, right? And let's try to build an image again, and let's see what it does. So we are building this, and let's try to go into the container. So let's do docker container and run detached, and the container name is Thor. With this we get the container ID, and now we want to go inside the container ID, and the command to do that is docker execute iterative, give the container name, right, and then do bin bash. This will take you inside the container, and if you do ls, you see a couple of files here. So we do see source and pom, which is what we want. We also want dockerfile. Some people advise to keep dockerfile in images. Some people don't advise to put in dockerfile in images. The reason which says why you should add is, like, if you put the dockerfile in image, maybe somebody else can understand how this image was built. They can optimize it. They might customize it. So I think I like that argument more than the argument that says that you do not need dockerfile because you only need it to build images, right? So but apart from these 3 files, there are other 3 files as well which we don't need. So let's try to ignore them. And it's always good to do what I just did, to go inside the container and see what files are copied, because otherwise you might accidentally copy some secrets, which is not what you would want to pass in the image, right? So now we have ignored these files also. I will exit. Let's repeat the procedure. So let's say build the image, run container. You will get a new ID, and let's try to execute it again and just change the container ID from C3 to F9. If I do ls now you can see that we only have the files that we intended to keep. So this way we have a more cleaner Dockerfile compared to the previous command. But you do have to remember that if you try to take this approach, you have to make sure that you're not copying any files that you don't want to copy. So that's one thing that you have to be aware of, because otherwise the other approach where you specifically copy the files like we did earlier to copy source and pom is also a very good approach. So but now you're aware of both, so you can make use of this information to write more cleaner Docker files and to reduce your build context. So I hope you found this useful, and I hope you learned something new in this. So happy learning, and maybe I'll see you again in another video. See you. Bye bye.